U.S. forces invaded Cambodia.
Armed forces of South Vietnam, attacks are being launched this week to clean out major enemy sanctuaries on the Cambodian-Vietnam border.
As news of the invasion spread, the U.S. domestic reaction was explosive. Nearly 500 American universities shut down, and on the morning of May 4th, National Guardsmen opened fire on 15 students at Kent State University, killing 4. As Nixon promised publicly to remove forces from Cambodia, Kissinger reviewed a plan to increase the pressure on North Vietnam to surrender.
Henry Kissinger began in the fall of 1969 in September to plan a savage, brutal blow against North Vietnam. These were his words. He said to us as a planning group, "I can't believe that a fourth-rate power like North Vietnam does not have a breaking point."
For 11 days in December of 1972, in what became known as the Christmas bombing, 129 B-52 bombers dropped 40,000 tons of bombs on Hanoi and Haiphong, hitting a hospital and other urban centers. What many did not know was that Kissinger had struck a peace accord with North Vietnam 2 months before. But South Vietnam's President Thieu, the man who had undermined the '68 peace talks, would not accept the deal without proof that the Americans would enforce it.
The Christmas bombing had much more to do with the South Vietnamese than with the North. It was a gesture to the Thieu regime. It was a way of saying the United States is willing to make this one great last brutal blow against the North.
They bombed the North Vietnamese simply to persuade the South Vietnamese that they meant it. It was a demonstration bombing. It was a public relations mass murder from the sky.
The bombing did appease the South, and Kissinger persuaded the North Vietnamese to make a few cosmetic concessions. In January 1973, Kissinger signed a peace accord with North Vietnamese negotiator Le Duc Tho. The terms of peace were almost identical to the terms the Johnson administration had nearly secured before the election of 1968.
Half the names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial are incised in stone for dates after January 1969. There is enough marble in Washington to put all the names on one wall. We wouldn't dare try and put up a wall that had the names of all the Vietnamese on it who died in that period.
When I shall receive the award, together with my old colleague in the search for peace in Vietnam, Mr. Le Duc Tho.
In 1973, Kissinger and Le Duc Tho were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace.
Or symbolize the end of the anguish and the suffering.
But to his embarrassment, Kissinger was unaware that Le Duc Tho would not attend the ceremony in Oslo.
The Vietnamese counterpart with whom he shared it, Mr. Le Duc Tho, refused to accept the prize on the perfectly excellent pragmatic grounds that there was no peace in Vietnam to celebrate, so there shouldn't be a prize for it.
I thought it was a terrible travesty that he should be awarded a peace prize when in fact he was a war maker, not a war ender.
Dr. Kissinger, what would you say was the high point of your tenure as Secretary of State?
Well, I would say in 1973, when I won the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Vietnam War.
And the low point?
I'd say 1975, when the Vietnam War ended.
Once the Paris Peace Accords were signed in December of '72, that ended the American direct involvement in Vietnam.
But to preserve peace with honor, Nixon and Kissinger decided to defend the anti-communist regime in Cambodia. It was to be a secret mission, airstrikes against communist forces directed by the American embassy in Phnom Penh.
It made free the American Air Force. They could not bomb in Laos, they could not bomb in Vietnam, so that began the incredible bombing of Cambodia. And this is when the number of bombs dropped, equaled the amount of bombs dropped on Japan during World War II.
Elizabeth Becker covered the war in Cambodia from 1972 to 1974.
We would be able to hear the conversation between the pilot, the American pilot in the air, and the American embassy, which was illegally directing the airstrikes. We couldn't understand why there were so many civilian casualties in this war. Why were they hitting all these civilians in villages? It was every nightmare of how you fight a war.
From 1969 to 1973, more than 500,000 Cambodians died. By 1974, the bombing had disrupted the nation's agricultural system and a famine ensued. Over 2 million refugees poured into overcrowded cities.
American policy in those years towards Cambodia helped create the conditions, perhaps the only conditions, in which the Khmer Rouge came to power.
The Khmer Rouge drew strength from the chaos of the country. When they seized power in 1975, they forced populations of entire cities back to the countryside. Then they began a policy of exterminating their enemies in execution grounds that came to be known as killing fields. By 1979, another 3 million Cambodians had lost their lives.
No one knew what the Khmer Rouge were going to do. It's quite wrong to blame the United States for the murderousness of the Khmer Rouge. That's a disgracefully dishonest thing to try to do. But the carelessness with which the United States treated Cambodia as a sideshow to Vietnam did lead to disaster to Cambodia.
Congress authorized money for bombs in South Vietnam, and they went into Cambodia. There's a criminal act for you, lying. And therefore, I think anybody who died in Cambodia, you could argue criminally that they were guilty of murder one. People did it. Nobody authorized them to bomb Cambodia.
There was no American war in Cambodia before President Nixon and Dr. Kissinger.
That is totally incorrect. I think we inherited a tragedy. We attempted to and succeeded in extricating America with honor from this tragedy.
Oh, we inherited it. No, you did not inherit it. You were the designers of the Cambodian policy.
Crimes against humanity are crimes that comprise genocide or torture or mass murder committed on a widespread and systematic basis against innocent civilian populations.
You're talking about war crimes, for example. When World War II started and Germany first bombed London, everyone was horrified. Bombing cities, that was criminal behavior. You bombed troops. You didn't bomb innocent civilians. By the time the war was over, we had virtually wiped out Dresden, for example, in one of the most horrible bombing raids ever. And Tokyo, we virtually burned to the ground. So, was that criminal? Perhaps.
In July 1973, the detection of Nixon's taping system would lead to the discovery of the Watergate cover-up, the indictment of key members of the White House staff, and the end of the Nixon presidency.
The lies that had to be told by the administration over Cambodia led eventually to the employment of the plumbers, which was the secret White House team employed to stop leaks, which led to Watergate, which led to the fall of Nixon. So in a way, the bombing of Cambodia was the first step in the chain that led to the fall of Nixon.
Nixon resigned rather than face impeachment. One of the original articles of impeachment addressed the concealment of the Cambodian bombing from Congress. When the impeachment was dropped, so was the investigation into the secret bombing. The new president, Gerald Ford, retained Henry Kissinger as his Secretary of State and pardoned Richard Nixon.
Nixon managed to cop a shameful plea, accept a pardon. His Attorney General, former campaign manager, John Mitchell, is put in an orange jumpsuit and sent down the river. No Attorney General's ever been to jail before. But there are more members of the Nixon group, all of them bound to each other.